Here we go. All right. Good morning, Urban Ecology Collaborative. This is our last meeting of the year. The Urban Ecology Collaborative is a group of groups. We're focused in the New England and Mid-Atlantic regions, and we meet every month virtually on the third Wednesday of each month to talk about urban forestry and related topics. Our Google group is a place for sharing about upcoming events, research, jobs, urban forestry topics, and it's also where we announce our upcoming meetings. So join that if you haven't already. And you can always find our recent meeting recordings at our YouTube channel, which is just Urban Ecology Collaborative. So I'll let a few more people in. And if you are just joining, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Name, where you're calling in from, what organization you work with, and maybe your favorite thing about the holiday season that you're looking forward to. And today I will just introduce, we are excited to have Rachel Holbert with us from the Newport Tree Conservancy. And she's going to tell us a story about the Newport Tree Conservancy called Planting for the Future. We still have some more people joining. And we're testing out our Zoom skills today, so I have to make Rachel the full host of this meeting. So Rachel will also have the dual task of letting more people into the meeting, so we'll accommodate that. But I'll go ahead and make you the host now, Rachel. Folks can continue to introduce themselves, and we will learn a little bit about Newport. So there you go, Rachel.
Thank you, Erica. Good morning, everyone. Bear with me as I get my things ready here. Okay, and I'll make sure I can still admit folks. Beautiful. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to talk with you a little bit about the Newport Tree Conservancy. We are kind of a unique organization, so we're going to talk about 3 different buckets, if you will. We plant trees around our city of Newport in Rhode Island. I'll get into our geography a little bit more in a second. We also do some historic propagation of woody plant material, which is very exciting. And finally, we do a lot of programming for adults and children around our city. I'm going to talk a little bit about our strategy and our structure around that too. But overall, my goal is to share our program model with you, and I look forward to questions at the end. Let's see. Okay, I want to give a shout out to a few of our partners. We work with our Newport Health Equity Zone. I mentioned we partner really closely with the city of Newport itself. We get some funding from Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. We do some Arboretum accreditation through ArbNet. And of course, American Forests, who I know many of you are familiar with. Okay, so first things first, I am joining you from the ancestral and present-day lands of the Narragansett, the Wampanoag, and the Pokanoket people. So I expect that many of you are in the Northeast. You might be familiar with Rhode Island. It's a tiny little place, and we in Newport are at the bottom of a tiny little island. And despite what that map shows, we are an actual island. But just for fun, I'm from Louisiana originally. Our state of Rhode Island is about 629 square miles. And just for fun, that map of Louisiana, you can see the Lake Pontchartrain right above New Orleans. That's roughly half the size of Rhode Island. And Louisiana is not a huge state. So, okay, so giving you the context for where we work, you can see in this photo, we've got some beautiful Gilded Age mansions, historic architecture, sailboats in the background. This photo was taken before beach leaf disease hit Newport, so you can see some beautiful purple beaches there. But there's something interesting going on. You can see here, American Forest Tree Equity Score Analyzer tool, that we only have 25% tree cover in Newport. So there's something going on. Not every corner of Newport looks like that photo that I shared with you. So I have outlined a couple of block groups here. You can see that we've got quite a range of tree equity scores here. And what I want to do is tell you the tale of 2 very different Newports. This block group with a tree equity score of 80, I want to point out a couple of demographic information points here. That health risk indicator at the bottom, 45. We have only 13% of people in poverty, and only 10% of folks here in this block group are people of color. Now, conversely, if you look over here at this block group, which has a score of 60, you can see our health risk indicator jumps to 75. So we've got less tree canopy cover here. We've got greater exposure to heat islands, stormwater runoff impact. My screen is covering up things. Oh, there we go. So we've got a jump. We have 55% of our folks that live there are living in poverty, and 61% of folks there are people of color. So this is a historically redlined community in Newport, and the Newport Tree Conservancy is working toward tree equity here. So what are we doing about it? I want to share with you some data from 2021 and 2023. Our annual report for this year has not been out yet, so we are prioritizing planting in that North End neighborhood of Newport. So we've got a couple of community tree planting programs, and we have incentivized trees getting in the ground in that North End area. So particularly our spring community tree program, folks in the North End don't have any fee along with that tree that's planted. And then we've also hired a contractor and make sure that if planting the tree itself is a barrier for folks, that we can send someone out to plant that tree, get it in the ground, and provide some resources in terms of information on tree care. We also have been working for the last, I believe this was our 5th year, this past fall. Miantonomy Park is a public park that is centered in the North End neighborhood. That's been a place where we've planted at least 100 native trees every year, getting the community involved. In addition to that, we've got a good amount of public trees that we're caring for in combination with our city forestry staff. Something I didn't mention is that Newport Tree Conservancy actually fundraises for all of our trees that are planted in our city. All right, so you have a little bit of context for Newport itself, what's going on with the tree canopy and that lack of tree equity. But who are we? Newport Tree Conservancy is a really small staff. There are only 5 of us that work full-time. We've got 2 part-time staff, but we managed to get this work done. So you can see here, Joe Verstandig, our living collections manager, at our Heritage Tree Center, which we lovingly call the Tree House, is where we grow up a lot of our trees. We might get bare root specimens in that we pot up from other places. We do seed grown trees and other propagation efforts. You can get a little sense of what's going on here. And here's another view in greener times. This Heritage Tree Center is presently located at our public high school here in Newport, which has been a really wonderful opportunity to integrate with biology, environmental science, horticulture classes. So this was designed as a grow operation for us and our needs, but right now we do also use it as educational space. All right, so let's dig into some more of those activities. I mentioned Miantonomy Park, again, in the North End of Newport. We have that reforestation effort that's happening every year. You can see city trees that are getting planted in tree pits. Those are trees that we're paying for, and we work really closely with our city to make sure that those get in the ground and are cared for. I mentioned before, we also have our spring and fall residential tree planting programs. We're getting trees in our parks in other corners of Newport. So these might be things that we're putting in the ground for Earth Day, Arbor Day, tree planting days in between there. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the planting bucket. I want to move on to our second bucket of activities, which is propagation of historically important plant material. So you can see here in our seedling trays, we've got some sweet gum, we've got some tulip trees, I believe there's a katsura in the background, some hornbeam, and you can see some of our older trees in the background there. And here's a little inset. Joe, our living collections manager, is very busy around February doing lots of grafting for us. So Newport has been around for a while. It was founded in 1639, and it has been a city that is rich in horticulture history. So we have some amazing trees here that are either a couple hundred years old, or they are interesting cultivars that are no longer in the trade. We also have trees here that were planted by Olmsted. I'm thinking of a sweet gum in particular in Morton Park. So those are trees that we've deemed have historically important genetic material. We're able to take scions and make exact genetic clones. And the idea is that as we grow up these historic trees, that we can replace them in the ground when those elder trees succumb to illness or things like that. I have a little case study here. This is a tree that's near and dear to us. This is a tree that's just down the street from our office, right outside of the Newport Art Museum. It's this really beautiful magnolia, and it was labeled as a star magnolia for many years. And Joe did some digging because, as you can see, if you're familiar with star magnolias, this tree is pretty robust. It's a really big, tall tree. It's got some layering going on. And I'll show you a close-up of those flowers. You can see the blooms on the left of this inset don't look like a lot of typical star magnolia cultivars that inset on the right. So after doing some digging, Joe found that it is not a star magnolia, but it is a magnolia that's from the Arnold Arboretum. It's a cultivar called Merrill, Magnolia lobneri. And there are no other trees like this in Newport. So this is another example of something that is a really special tree. So we did some propagation trials. Another one of our trees here in Newport, a really spectacular weeping beech on one of the small arboreta here. This is a tree that we've been interested in for years. So we've been dealing with beech leaf disease the last 2 years. I want to show you, this is a list of trees that we propagated. I believe this is in 2022, and you can see there's a fair amount of beeches in there. We have put the brakes on with our beech propagation, a lot of other things here. I mentioned katsura before, some Turkish oaks, Camperdown elm, lots of special trees, some grown from seed as well, that might end up being rootstock. But one really interesting thing is that out in Ohio, where beech leaf disease originated, Holden Arboretum is doing some grafting trials of beeches that have been living with the disease and persevering for the last 10 years. So we're kind of uniquely positioned. We know how to do beech grafting well. And as we watch this disease unfold here in Newport, if we see mature trees that are showing resistance to beech leaf disease, we can do some propagation trials, we can do some grafting, and hopefully help that effort to reintroduce some resistant individuals. Okay, so I've mentioned Arboreta a few times. We do partner with ArbNet, and something that Newport Tree Conservancy has done that I think is kind of innovative is champion tree species diversity through our city by encouraging property owners and some public spaces as well to become sort of micro-arboreta. So our living collections manager works with these properties to inventory tree species. I lead public programs there, so we make sure that there's public access. These are all level 1 arboreta in the portfolio. We have 15 private properties that are currently accredited, 2 more coming online in 2024, and there's 6 more properties that are just already public spaces. But you can go to our website, you can click on any of these, read their inventory list, and learn a little bit more about the property. It's just one of the things that we do, trying to get folks really engaged in trees here in the city. Speaking of engaging folks with the trees here in Newport, we of course could not do our work without volunteers. So this is inside of our high tunnel hoop house. We've got folks here from the spring, probably late March, that are helping us to pot up some bare root trees. Some of those trees might have ended up being planted in Miantonomi Park after they've been grown up for a while. But we work really hard to engage our adult community. So we do work in our public park spaces. We have a program called Tree Corps, as well as some other volunteer events around Earth Day, Arbor Day, stuff like that. And we do a lot of adult programming aside from volunteer work. So one of the things that we try to do is, in addition to Arboretum tours, we do free tree walks. So these are just in neighborhoods where people are living, working, going to school. There's really amazing trees all throughout the city, and we want to make sure that those educational opportunities are accessible. Got another shot of Joe here in one of our parks. We were doing a dogwood pruning workshop. One of the benefits of partnering really closely with the city is that we can go into our city parks and they trust us to start pruning things. So this was a cool opportunity because people not only got to listen to Joe's wealth of information, but also do some hands-on pruning with our Coosa dogwoods here. Now, one of my main tasks as program director is youth programming. So since I was hired in 2020, I've built programming that is outside of our schools, really experiential work with all ages. So you can see our youngest Newport residents all the way through grade 12. We are starting out in our continuum of moving toward environmental literacy with really noticing the trees around us, learning to love the trees around us. And then as we engage middle schoolers and high schoolers where it's more developmentally appropriate, we learn about tree equity. We are talking about climate change action. Trees are a really critical tool in our toolkit to fight climate change. So our students are really, really engaged in what's going on around our city. One of the really nice things is that we don't have to rely on transportation for our students because we're walking around the city, right around the schools, right around community centers. So this is really important in reducing barriers to access. All right. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a larger snapshot of the things that we teach for both our adult and our youth audiences. So we really like to go back to that arboriculture and, excuse me, I cannot talk this morning, horticulture practices. Always love to do woody species ID. We like to do some cultivar overviews. So for example, our viburnum talk is popular. We might be doing these things with garden clubs or different neighborhood groups. I mentioned those guided walks before. Climate change action is something I like to weave into all of our programming where possible. And it's not just about what climate change is, but that action piece and collective action at that. And youth topics, I like to talk with our educators around the city and really learn what science standards they're trying to hit and hit well. So we customize things to talk about soil science. We might be doing some chemical equation balancing with photosynthesis, cycling of matter and nutrients. So there's a lot of creativity that's possible there, which is one of my favorite things. So we've talked about those 3 buckets of focal points for Newport Tree Conservancy. And I want to touch on the strategy because I did promise we would talk about that a little bit. So how do we move forward? Newport Tree Conservancy has been around since 1987. And the organization was founded because some of these Gilded Age trees, very old trees around Newport, were dying. And the organization has really transformed in the last couple of years, as I mentioned before, looking at issues of tree equity around our city, centering education so that we have an environmentally literate group of young folks who are coming up. But we need to continue to move forward. So one of the things that I really appreciate about Newport Tree Conservancy, especially being a very small staff, is that we always focus on quality, not on quantity. So this is true for propagation planting and our programs. You know, the idea is that we could plant 300 more trees than we already do, but are all of those trees going to survive without the care that they need, right? And the same goes for programs. Yes, I could fill every day, all day long with education programs, but the quality is probably going to suffer. So we do what we do with a focus on quality. I've mentioned our partnerships. And aside from that first slide, there are many, many organizations that we work closely with in our city. We've got our public school system, our community centers, other environmental organizations, other education organizations, and we need this patchwork of efforts because ultimately we're all trying to make our city a better place. We also have focused on that thoughtful and deliberate growth. I mentioned my position was added in 2020. That was a brand new position for our organization. Our board of directors had identified education as a critical growth area for the future. 2021, we added our communications manager, and in 2022, we were lucky enough to add a horticulture assistant. So it's been deliberate growth. It's been a really wonderful process to be a part of. We are going to continue to center tree equity in Newport's North End. We've got some robust green spaces elsewhere in the city, but there is more work to be done. Let's see here. I did mention to y'all that we pay for all the trees that get planted in the city, which is no small feat, but we also make sure that our school programs are free. So this is really critical, again, as a point of access. We want to make sure that all of our students in Newport have access to this programming. So we're forever looking for funding sources, a mixture of places, federal grants, private foundations, donors, you name it, we're looking for it. And finally, I just wanted to give a shout out to, again, working with the city, our Tree and Open Space Commission, and also our Health Equity Zone. So in the end, you know, we're planting trees, we're in schools doing programs, but all of this comes together to prioritize outcomes that are positive for both people and the environment. And we're doing that through the tree planting. So that is what I have for you today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share what we're doing at Newport Tree Conservancy. I've got our website there. You can check out information about all of those things I mentioned. My email address is there. I'd be happy to chat with folks about anything that I covered, connect you with other people in our staff. And with that, I am ready for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Great job, Rachel. Yeah, it's awesome to hear about a new place. And I see Dexter's hand, so I'm going to scroll back in the chat and get those questions lined up. But Dexter, I would say you can unmute and go for it while I do that.
Hey, how are you? Thanks, Rachel, for a great presentation. Wow, your organization does so many great things.
Thank you.
One thing that stuck out to me was the grafting. This is like a really rare or niche thing, or maybe my own ignorance. Like, not many of the urban forestry groups I work with do grafting, and if they do, it's like one person as like a, you know, unfunded side project. But to see the volume, so I just want to know a little bit more about the history of that, how that came to be, the cost effectiveness. I realize it's difficult to scale, but It makes sense with your very deliberate, intentional focus on quality. Yeah, how this program come to be? What can other folks on the call learn from grafting, and whether or not it's could be a part of their programs?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Dexter. And I know my coworker Joe's on the call as well. So I'll give a little bit of information. And Joe, if you have anything to add, please feel free to unmute and add. So as a nonprofit organization, totally non-governmental, we identified this need for cloning the genetic material of these important plants around the city. So not only do we have a rich horticultural tradition here in the city, but we also have a preservation society. There's many historic properties. So this idea for grafting was really born out of the idea that when you look at a historic property, the trees themselves as woody species are part of the living landscape. So we've got landscape designers, of course, who are working with architects. So for us, we were able to make a case because of the historic nature of these properties and the trees themselves that were so closely tied to landscape architects, essentially. So that's where it started. You know, we've got, back in that slide I had, it listed the properties where the trees were coming from. Some estates like Chateau Sumer, some of our Gilded Age properties, Newport Restoration, Foundations properties themselves, where we get our Turkish oak seedlings and some scions. And yeah, it's something that is, I think, kind of a niche endeavor. So it is not a really large scale. We do trials of different things each year. We have some successes. We have some not so great things. You know, we lose some seedlings every year. And honestly, it's been a really interesting pivot with beech leaf disease hitting Newport so hard. You know, I can see from my window right here, we've got a magnificent fernleaf beech, and a lot of our stock has died at the Heritage Tree Center. So, Joe, is there anything you want to say? You're listening?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to add that we had an outstanding plantsman, Nick Castratara, who came before me, who was a master grafter, and he kind of kickstarted the program with his ability to graft as well as he could. So we had the capability to do it as well with good horticulturists.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, what we do is always built on the work of the folks that come before us, right? Okay, I see there's a question in the chat. Let's see.
So Rachel, there is a follow-up to this question. So
Oh, okay.
I can handle grabbing the questions from the chat if it's
Okay.
helpful for you.
Yeah.
But Frank, hey Frank, Frank is saying to follow on Dr. Locke, please tell more about the nursery at the high school. So like a day in the life of, do the students help? What's the maintenance schedule for that?
Yeah, this actually might be something that Joe can better speak to than I can. But no, so the high school students aren't really involved in like the day-to-day stuff. We do have a couple of select volunteers during the growing season who will come out and help with the watering, which is really the most intensive thing. You know, our horticulture staff is 2 people, with the 3rd assistant during the growing season. So really kind of maintaining that stock, maintaining the health and cleanliness of the facility. So it's interesting because it's sort of like a courtyard, and there are some raised beds where teachers will grow vegetables. And there are some students who will come out and sort of like eat their lunch, or if there's a study period, will come out there. So it's been kind of like a nice little quiet space where some of the high schoolers who are interested in plants can come out and engage and connect with our staff. But most of the student engagement is through scheduled programs, again, where I have like biology or environmental studies students who are coming out to do a really particular project.
That's great. I wish I went to a high school that had the Newport Tree Conservancy right outside of it. That sounds like a great place to eat lunch.
Yeah.
Scrolling back in the chat, the first question was from me, which was, what is the Newport City Urban Forestry staff setup or investment like? Is there an urban forest plan for the city or something similar like that?
Yeah, great questions. So we have a tree warden. So one of the things that the Newport Tree Conservancy achieved when, back when it was a much younger organization, was identify the need for a tree warden for the city. And so that's been a really critical role. The forestry staff is small. It's 3 people. I know they have a lot of other contractors that work on park maintenance, but it is a small team. Our horticulture folks work with them, so they're trading information. We do use tree keeper, so that is a shared resource between their folks and our folks. It's something that we're always working toward utilizing better. I mentioned we're fundraising for all of the trees, but the city is definitely supporting those staff members that they have on the ground.
Great. Awesome to learn more about another city. I'm seeing the next question is, are the historically important trees going to survive temperature increase from climate change?
Yeah, great question. Some of our historic trees are things of the more southerly range. Like we've got some really impressive sweet gums that are here. One thing I didn't mention, actually, my final slide, I don't know if anyone noticed, but it was a seedling of a live oak. And again, I'm from Louisiana. I love a good live oak. They don't really grow here. So that is progeny from a really special live oak from Virginia that survived some incredibly cold weather. I can't remember the exact temperature that parent tree survived, but we do have a little gaggle of tiny live oaks that maybe one day we can plant. We just did our strategic planning this past year. It was completed, and one of our important focal points is planning for the future in terms of our changing climate, changing weather patterns, things like that. So it is something that is on our mind, and we're keeping an eye on the historic trees that exist and the progeny that is in our Heritage Tree Center.
Great. This question is maybe sort of similar. Have any of the private level 1 arboreta focused on native trees? Attaining 25 plus tree species or cultivars is ostensibly commendable, but adding non-native sadly reduces the biodiversity carrying capacity of these spaces. And I guess I would just say, like, native to when and where is a big thing that I think about as an urban ecologist in Boston. So yeah, I guess have any of those arboreta focused on native trees?
Yeah, wonderful question. So I've noticed in visiting almost all of these arboreta that there's typically a mixture of things that are from other parts of the world that are of horticultural interest, but definitely some of our properties champion native species. And that's something that as an organization, we love geeking out over cool plants, but we also champion the importance of our native species. So yes, there's a couple of properties I'm thinking of that even have some tiny little waterways that go through them, like a brook or a creek. And so it's really cool to see where some of our property owners have allowed native plants, like not herbaceous species, to grow up around the woody species. So we've got these layers of sort of microhabitat. I myself am a bird person. That's where I started my career. So I love attending these walks where Joe is leading and I'm there and I'm like, oh, we've got food sources for different kinds of birds. Did you know that this species is a great insect host species? So yeah, we do have that focus. We are getting that word out.
Rachel, I love that. I'm also a bird person. Can we hear more about your bird person origin story, like a little detour
Yeah,
into that?
for sure. I went to LSU as an undergrad, and um, I love birds as a young person, and I was so lucky to work in the Museum of Natural Science there in the ornithology department. So I had some exposure to some really world-class collections and researchers. And the flyway there at the delta of the Mississippi River is really incredible. So that's where I came from. And when I came up to Rhode Island about 17 years ago, I ended up working for a place also here on Aquidneck Island called Norman Bird Sanctuary. And so I've been there for many years, worked with raptors professionally, and I've just really been enjoying birding in New England. So
That is amazing. I just might put in a little bit like in our follow-up links and stuff. There is a really strong connection between urban bird conservation and urban forestry. So I guess, Rachel, I could ask you, have you thought about the Urban Bird Treaty Cities program? I think Providence is part of that program, and it does involve tree planting to a pretty large extent, actually. Any
yes.
thoughts on that program?
Yeah, for sure. So I will say, with our tree walks every year, those free tree walks that are in the city neighborhoods and things like that, I try to do at least one bird walk where we are noticing. So I'll do my research ahead of time and point out trees that are particularly good food sources or nesting habitat, things like that. But yes, so we do also work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have an urban refuge partnership here around Rhode Island because we're so little. The refuges are partnered with the Parks Department in Providence through U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So yes, so we do receive some support through them as well as part of that network.
So awesome. And sorry, Phil, I put your question behind all these bird questions. But Phil's question is, many historic and unique trees in Newport, do you reproduce and sell for fundraising? What are your quantities? Perhaps communities in this collaborative want to trial plant to enhance diversity.
Yeah, great questions. So some of the plant material is sold, and we do use that for fundraising. So every year, our annual fundraiser is the evening of the Arboreta Gala, and there will be some select, really special specimens that we auction off, or raffle auction. We do an auction. We have been really careful and intentional, knowing what our capacity is. We're not a production for sales facility. And so the trick there is that outside of our two community planting programs, we have kind of stayed away from being a place where people can come up and say, hey, I want to buy this from you. It's just not really the way that we operate. So I think it goes under that small and intentional file, if you will.
Great. And I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I do see that Marcus, who asked about the nativity, was saying it can be broadly defined to level 1 ecoregions. I do really like the ecoregion approach as well, which provides a lot of latitude in achieving urban tolerance and climate adaptability while providing ecological benefit. And I'm working right now on a species selection tool because we do have IRA funding. So I guess I would ask Rachel, do you know if you have like CJUST disadvantaged communities, or if Rhode Island received some of that Inflation Reduction Act funding for tree planting? And are you making sort of like a species list for that? Do you have priority species that you're planting? Kind of some of those questions.
Yeah, so there have been various awards for Inflation Reduction Act money, or regionally. There's a regional ask that we were part of. I know there's some folks that are in Providence that got some funding, and Rhode Island DEM is also funneling some of that money too. So I know we've been in talks recently with Rhode Island DEM around urban forestry and some of that funding. I'm sorry, Erica, what was the rest of your question?
No worries. These are always multi-part questions and they're
Yeah.
hard to all take in. Just kind of about species selection. So you said you're dealing with beech leaf disease and you know, you have Joe on the call and everything. Do you have like recommended species that you're really focusing on? You might have mentioned some of them. I think sweet gum, that's appearing on all the lists I'm seeing, things like that. So what's your species selection process like, maybe for specifically selfishly for those private land plantings or those community plantings in the north end?
Yeah, great question. I have a feeling I'm going to turn this one over to Joe in a second. I do want to say part of our structure is that we have a living collections committee. So our tree warden sits in on that. We've got folks who are on the city's tree and open space commission. We've got a couple of other knowledgeable folks, and then our executive director and Joe sit on that committee. And what they do is basically go over our planting lists for the year and figure out what we need to order, what we need to grow up. Joe, would you like to chime in on any specific tree species that you select for?
Well, I guess I can say that firstly, native species are certainly always a focus for us whenever we're selecting trees to go into the urban landscape. But we often turn to the nursery industry as well and pay attention to, you know, which cultivars are best adapted for difficult locations, being close to obviously the Narragansett Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, salt water, you know, adaptive ability. So we're constantly turning to the nursery industry to kind of help us select species that are going to perform best in our location and also best adapted to be resistant to pests and diseases and also climate change as well.
That's wonderful. It sounds great to have like a committee of folks who are, you know, some urban foresters, some arborists, some nurserymen, some folks like that, all getting together and kind of, you said annually talking about the species and the planting needs. That sounds really really effective, and it's bringing to mind the Northeast Seed Network. That's something that I've just started joining, like a meeting here and there. I think they've just started up their meetings. But there was actually nursery folk on those meetings who I hadn't really crossed paths with before in Boston. So yeah, really great to hear kind of like what the structure is for you all in Newport. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I want to add one little story, actually, one anecdote. One of the schools that we work with here, I keep saying we, that I work with here in Newport, is the East Bay Met School. And last year was really special. They were engaged in a year-long journey of abolitionist work. And they identified a tree as the symbol of the work and the journey that the student body was embarking on together. I didn't mean to make that a pun, but I did. And so they wanted to plant a tree in Miantonomi Park, which is within walking distance from their school in the North End. And so we made it a big research project. So the students ended up choosing one of our native dogwoods, and it was really cool to kind of guide them on that process. I gave them some like bumpers, right? Like this is a list that you can choose from to research. But in the end, the choice was theirs, and it was a really special collaborative process.
That's really awesome. That sounds like a fun journey for the students too. Okay, so we have one more question. What are your funding priorities for the next couple of years? What would be your budget for those items? And helpful to know in case funding opportunities come our way.
Yeah, funding. We are always looking for money for the trees themselves. I would say behind that, operational needs are really important. You know, it takes people to do the work that we're doing. We're also looking for funding for those programs that I mentioned. We're working at elementary school level, middle school level, high school level, collaborating with our local university. And those are things that always need bolstering. I don't do our organizational budget, so I don't have information for you on, ballpark budget estimates, but yeah, trees, operations to do those 3 buckets of activities, and the programs themselves are where we focus our fundraising efforts.
Awesome. Great. I don't see any other questions in the chat. People can feel free to raise their hands and ask more questions for Rachel. I always forget this, when we had David as the co-chair, we always asked for community updates at the beginning before the presenter would start speaking. And I always am just so excited to hear from people that I'm just like, let's get into the presentation. So we'll have community updates at the end. I know there's one in the chat already, but I do want to leave some space for other people to raise their hands or get in any last questions for Rachel before we switch to that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, Cimbria?
It's actually Kimbria.
Kimbria. Okay, we got it now. Go ahead.
I'm new to the call, so this is great. Great hearing from everyone. My question is, are people thinking more about, we're starting to think more about ecosystems and placemaking rather than just trees? Because trees is not as sexy to people who are actually looking to revitalize disadvantaged community spaces and bring back the birds, bring back the animals. So is there anybody out there who's starting to think about things as an ecosystem? Love to hear from them. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can say that my previous work at a more general nature center, rather than just being a tree person, is that those charismatic species are really a draw and a hook for folks, right? Like I might be really interested in a chickadee, and then I learn that there are tree species that support it, right? Back to this connection with birds. Just yesterday, I was actually making pinecone bird feeders with my after-school program. So yeah, I think you're right. It's not just about the trees. Folks are interested in the overall health, livability, the mental health benefits. This has been a really important part of our collaboration with the Newport Health Equity Zone. That organization is headed up by the Women's Resource Center in Newport. And for example, we're using information like research on domestic violence cases being lower in places where there is access to green space. So we're able to leverage our partnerships and different aspects of healthy community. So not just aspects of a healthy ecosystem, like those charismatic animal species, but also health outcomes for people. And I think, as someone who came from an environmental justice part of the country, like I grew up on the Mississippi River in the shadow of petrochemical processing plants. When you are living in a place that's not healthy, you might not be interested in trees or birds or other animals. Like you might be most interested in your own safety, health, well-being, that kind of thing. So I think focusing on human needs in order to get trees in the ground is a really important tact.
Yes, Utica did receive funding through the IRA. And as a permaculture designer, I'm trying to help us think about the ecosystems and placemaking. And there are studies that show that trees actually keep the roads from degrading because the sun isn't hitting the tarmac as much, so you don't need to replace roads as quickly. And also it does reduce crime. The crime rates are lower where there are trees. So, there's evidence to what you're saying. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimbria, and welcome to the group. Great questions, and it's always great to have new folks tuning in. So I think I'll go back to Phil, thank you for this announcement. We'll include this in our email as a follow-up for this call. But Phil was announcing a national webinar on January 10th called Collaborations to Save Threatened Tree Species in Urban Areas, and provided a link. So we'll send that link out to everybody. That sounds like an exciting one to tune in for in the future. And just wondering if other folks have other community updates. Sometimes we'll do like successes from the year. So if anybody has something that they'd like to share. And then, oh, for a second, just thank you so much, Rachel. Great job. And I would ask for a round of applause, but I think it would be kind of quiet. So just thank you so much. Great job with your presentation today. Any other community updates that people want to start with? I see other people clapping, and I'll just I'll go for Boston, I guess. I see my colleague Amara's on the line. We're pretty excited about our progress on ARPA and IRA funding into the Boston Tree Alliance, which is we're kind of doing a democratized process to address tree canopy loss on private property. So Rachel, it's great to hear about your community efforts and how you're prioritizing and your species selection and other things like that as we're gearing up to have a spring planting season also on private properties in areas where, yeah, trees might not be people's first thought or there hasn't been previous engagement. So Amara, thanks for all your work this year. You've done a great job. And we're looking forward to Boston continuing to invest in its urban forest. Does anybody else have any announcements? Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rachel, for the great presentation. It's like the UEC is so amazing for this reason, where we get to have these intimate conversations about different programs and how we all do what we do. So I'm from Philly, and we're very excited about our IRA grant. And especially because it's going to allow us to create a coalition between all the organizations and the amazing residents who have been working so hard to create the Philly Tree Plan, which we released earlier this year. And now we're going to get to create a Philly Tree Coalition that is going to be like a combined effort to implement the plan. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to most in the next year. And we have some amazing folks on this line actually who've been really involved. Marcus has been super involved in that from the perspective of a community engagement and community voices committee. And Kalea, also an amazing folks at the DCNR state level. So really exciting stuff coming up. You're muted, Erica.
I was just clapping again and saying that's so awesome. So great to have an update from Philly. With our last 6 minutes, I mean, anyone else feel free to raise your hand and also give an update. I can let folks know that we do have some exciting calls coming up next year. So in January, we're going to be hearing from Pittsburgh. So that should be exciting. Clara, our other co-chair of the UEC, will be presenting with some partners about some things in Pittsburgh on January 17th. In February, let me see who we've got in February. I'm pretty sure it is Ian from the Broadway Mall, but let me just check it out. Yeah, Ian Olson from the Broadway Mall Association would like to speak then. And then in March, we might hear from Maine, which I haven't actually been on a UEC call where we've heard from someone from Maine to my recollection. So it'll be great to hear from the northeasternmost kind of one of the cities from Maine. And then in April, we usually have our spring planting roundtable. So we pretty much have the whole next few months ready to go. And yeah, just wishing everybody a great, happy holiday season to you, your families, all the trees that are overwintering that you may have planted. And thank you for joining this call. Happy holidays to everybody. And we'll see you in the new year. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Erica. Great to see everybody.